to be fair, helmets don't prevent traumatic brain injuries. They just prevent your brain from spilling out onto the pavement. That's all it is.
Okay.
To prevent huge skull fracture. And helmets are only rated for a 14-mile-an-hour impact. He was going roughly 40 miles an hour. I was traveling 20, so that's a 60-mile-an-hour impact. So it's no wonder it cracked all the way through.
I'm glad you've joined me today on the journey because I believe you and I are going to learn a lot from the guest that we have on today's show. His name is Eric Esposito, and he is a former competitive swimmer who turned to triathlons in his adult years. One day in 2017, while riding his bicycle to work, a car hit him, causing severe brain trauma. Though Eric is one of the lucky ones in that he's not physically incapacitated, the accident did affect many areas of his life, and he's here to talk about that and much more. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, how's it going?
It is doing very well. I'm really happy to have you here.
I'm glad to be here. It's a nice rainy day. The hurricane's making its way through.
Well, I hope you're staying safe.
Oh, yes. I'll tell you what, man. One of my favorite things to do is to swim outdoors through hurricanes. I'm far enough inland in Atlanta that I don't have to worry about winds or stuff like that. It's rain all day. It's fun to swim in the rain.
Well, good. I'm out here in the desert, so we don't get any, so I'm a little bit jealous. So I think the best thing to do is to start off by talking about the day of the accident. How much of that day do you remember?
Um, it's actually kind of difficult to say because when I got home, I wrote it down. Everything I could remember, I wrote it down. I learned, I have 3 degrees, and one of them is a psychology degree. And I learned in one of my classes that the way memory works is your original memory is imprinted. And then every time you retell the story, you rewrite the memory. So that's the latest version. It's like saving over on saving over a Word file, right? You made a couple of changes. Maybe there's some detail that changed, like you were wearing blue socks instead of black socks. And eventually enough changes over time to where it's not the original story. So I started writing them down like the second I got home from the hospital, everything since then, to have an accurate account. So I would like to think I have a fairly accurate account of what happened based on what I at least could remember that day.
Okay.
It's I remember going back all the way to I had 2 cups of coffee that morning before I went, before I rode out. I remember having, the I love yous back and forth between me and the fiance. I followed her out because she goes to work at the same time as I do. And I went on my way, zigzagging through Atlanta. Yeah, at 6 in the morning, there's really no huge rush hour traffic yet, even as bad as Atlanta traffic is. And, I was about a mile away from the office when I got hit. And it was an intersection that it looks like it's kind of like a Y, where it crosses over the railroad tracks right before that. And the guy was making a soft left-hand turn. He was a distracted driver. He was looking down at his GPS. I mean, he won't admit that, but it's basically pretty much inferred that when you say you're lost, you don't know where you are. You were trying to go to this place, but you don't know where it is. That means you're more than likely trying to look at your phone and figure out where you're at, right? So, yeah. And then he hit me. And then after that, I just remember being in the hospital for the rest of the day.
How long were you unconscious after you were hit?
So, when I was at the scene, they asked me if I was unconscious. I don't know. It was so fresh, you don't know. I remember this pain radiating throughout my body, and it turned black. And then when I opened my eyes, I was in the fetal position on the ground. I didn't know if 5 seconds had passed or 5 minutes had passed. In reality, based on my GPS, because triathletes, they either have a watch or they have it on the stem of their bike. Mine was on the stem of my bike that day. I could trace down to the moment of impact. And then the woman who was standing above me was a bystander who was a nurse practitioner. And she called from my phone to call my fiance, Danielle. So in that time, it was about 2.5 minutes. So roughly 2.5 minutes is what we could figure out I was unconscious.
Okay. Before we go further, what was the exact date of the accident?
October 5th, 2017. So we are nearing the 3rd anniversary.
I celebrate is obviously not the right word for this, but do you do anything to commemorate that day when it comes around?
This is going to be the first one I spent without my fiance or ex-fiance. So I don't have anything special planned. It just so happens that I did a lot of counseling after the accident, but I happened to have a counseling appointment that day. So we're just gonna talk about it a little bit. But for the most part, I use this website called Future Me. It's a little corny, but you could send yourself emails it's futureme.org. You could send yourself emails in the future. You could pick a time, 2 years, 5 years, a specific date, and you write your letter now to the future. And I tend to when I write those letters, I write with hope and optimism. And I knew I wrote one that is supposed to show up on that date because I was going to close down writing my life story of these books that I'm doing. I was going to kind of close down that chapter and move on to the next book with that letter. And people have read it and they said, this is the way you should end it. I'm like, okay. So, whenever that arrives on October 5th, I don't remember what time, it'll be a surprise. I vaguely remember what it says, but whenever they come, especially if you forget about them, it's always a surprise. It's kind of like you look to the future in anticipation, but you also speak about the past as it was the current. It's a unique way to do things, but, I like it.
Yeah, futureme.com. I think I might have to do that. Tell my future self some things to be prepared for. Sounds really cool.
You know what? And I'll get some of those letters that are going to feel a little bit odd because, they were anticipating that Danielle would still be in the picture, but she's not. So maybe they don't always hold true,
Right.
But that's kind of what the future is, if you're writing to anticipate what it's going to be like, this is what you hope for yourself.
So we're talking about an accident in which you suffered some massive brain trauma, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But when you talk about people who have massive brain trauma and bike accidents, you wonder, were they wearing a helmet? So I have to ask, were you wearing a helmet that day?
Yes, I definitely had a helmet on, and it cracked all the way through. To be fair, helmets don't prevent traumatic brain injuries. They just prevent your brain from spilling out onto the pavement. That's all it is.
Okay.
To prevent huge skull fracture. And helmets are only rated for a 14-mile-an-hour impact. He was going roughly 40 miles an hour. I was traveling 20, so that's a 60-mile-an-hour impact. So it's no wonder it cracked all the way through.
Right. Gosh, I can't imagine. Okay, so you're unconscious for a little bit. They took you obviously to the hospital. What was the diagnosis that the doctor was able to give you, not just about your brain, but the rest of your body as well?
Really, it was a bunch of bruises, contusions, road rash, and post-concussion syndrome was one. But we didn't really learn more until things went on. I didn't really get great medical care. Part of the problem is when it affects your career, and being in the United States, your healthcare is typically dependent on you being employed. But if you can't keep yourself employed, then you don't have healthcare. So I didn't start getting adequate medical care until about 2 years after we said, we're going to get paid for this out of pocket. My attorneys and everything, we did everything on liens. Then I started getting good medical care. But, at the hospital, it was just, you had a concussion. They didn't find a broken bone in my finger until 6 weeks later. A PA found it. because it was a non-displaced fracture. Um, that was the only broken bone I had, which is, I guess it's a good thing. But I ended up, psychiatrist diagnosed me with PTSD, acute stress disorder. Later, I would develop major depression a couple of times. So it was kind of an ever evolving thing.
Well, the good thing is, I mean, you didn't have any major breaks in your body. You weren't paralyzed. I mean, there are a lot of people who have, had those kind of accidents, and like, obviously you had brain trauma, so you did hit your head pretty hard, and people have hit their head in ways that have left them really incapacitated. Was there ever a thought in this any immediate time after the accident you thought there might be some paralysis?
Actually, so when I was on the ground, I was on the ground, and this was as the nurse practitioner was talking to me, and I wasn't quite processing what she was saying, but I'm thinking to myself, okay, don't move, don't move, but try to move your fingers. So I wiggle my fingers. I said, okay. Try to wiggle your toes. So I wiggle my toes. I'm like, okay, I am not immediately paralyzed. Things aren't going to be that bad as long as they backboard me all right and get me to the hospital. Um, I didn't know if I had any spinal fractures or anything, but I knew at that point fingers and toes were moving, so things were at least looking up.
So you talked about some of the things that the injury, how it affected you later. You talked about some depression, some PTSD. I read that there was also some issues with some mood swings. Tell us about how that affects you in your everyday life.
Yeah, the area, the left temporal lobe is what got my damage, and it part of that region does emotion control, um, and the default. It feels like my default emotion a lot is anger. If I don't understand anything, it's anger. It's frustration's anger. It's just there was no other emotion to really fill that void. Um, and it's gotten better over time that I've kind of tried to relearn things. It was very hard to deal with someone because, you know, when you would say or do things, that's not the way you were thinking them, but this is the way it just came out. And, you know, it was, especially when you didn't understand stuff, that was the most difficult thing. So, uh, it wasn't exactly the most healthy thing, but again, nobody gave me a choice in any of this.
Right. But did you obviously, you had difficulty controlling your emotions. Was there any kind of work that you were doing to be able to allow yourself to be able to handle these mood swings and whenever they would happen?
You know what? With the mood swings, it was kind of like a short outburst. Um, it would happen, and then it was like night and day. It's just like quick switch. It was very fleeting. It didn't last long, um, and so it was almost like you had to let it run its course because it's not like one of those things that lagged on for days or a week or something like that. It's part of what I went to. I've been going counseling for a long time. And, like I said, with the quality medical care, when I was with Kaiser Permanente, when I returned to work, they're not very good. And they were like doing counseling every 5 or 6 weeks. I said, I need to go more frequently. So I've got a lot of things I need to work through. I said every week, 2 weeks, they would do it. So, down the road, I went out on my own. And kind of why we need a healthcare system in this country that, you know, I've always felt that healthcare should be a right. Other countries seem to do well at it. Why can't we? And I feel like my life is a good example to highlight what could go wrong when your healthcare is dependent on your employer. It's if it ruins my career, uh, then I don't have healthcare, and I'm not technically disabled yet, so I'm in limbo. So it makes
Interesting.
things difficult.
Yeah, I would imagine you had a lot of that. That was probably the source of a lot of your stress and your recovery was not being able to get the kind of help that you really wanted and needed.
Yeah, it's that was definitely a major deterrent in making any progress. It's kind of you're never going to be the person that you were before. That person is dead. Um, then there's a transition phase. There's no set time on how long it's going to be until you figure out who you are. And for me, it didn't start happening until, um, honestly, I wasn't able to be a functional architect. And for over 2 years, I tried to make that work. But, once that was gone, that stress was relieved. And then, my relationship with my fiance, once I lost the fear of that collapsing and that went away, the stress went away. And then I can actually, focus on me and focus on the healing and all the rehab. And then that's, for the last 9 months, that's when I've made the most progress. And, when you remove a lot of those, you live in fear for a big point of time. I mean, I was every day I would wake up wondering, are they going to figure out that I'm not competent at doing this job anymore? Or is this a day where Danielle figures out she is better off without me? And once you can wake up without those, you feel like you have a lot of weight lifted off your shoulder. Um, you know, it's not weight that anybody else could help you lift either. It's just stuff that has to, that you've been carrying on your own.
Gosh, I can't imagine how tough that must have been to get to that point where you know that you're better off. But I would imagine it was tough keeping that positivity when you lost your job, and then all of a sudden the breakup with your fiance. How do you keep the positive thoughts going so that you can continue to um, live the life that you feel that you can live?
Well, during those first 2 years, they weren't always positive thoughts. Um, I mean, you have points where there's just really nothing positive going on. Anybody who's had really traumatic or difficult times in their life and just say, you know what, there was a real dark spot right there, and I don't know how I got through it. There's not a lot of explanation that I didn't end up killing myself during those major depressions. You know, my it always came down to like when I was really low, I could never kill myself because I've got two cats that I've had for they're 14 and 16 and a half. And I could never imagine leaving them. And I also could never imagine putting me killing myself onto anyone else. I've had to bear this cross of my own and do this mostly on my own journey, but I could never put the weight of that onto anyone else and never really give them an answer what happened. So, it wasn't a positive to look towards, but knowing that I had something that would, at the very end of the day, the cats are always happy to see me. So there was always something there that could keep me going, even
Yeah.
though if you don't have a lot of positives. And then, eventually when I started to get, be open about my brain injury and finding out that I wasn't alone, the positives came. You don't want to suffer in silence. Um, that's why I needed people to know my story. I needed the people to get out there and talk to people. And then I figured out I don't want anybody else to ever feel like they're alone either. So, you know, eventually if you just stick it out, things do get better. It's just a matter of time. And the amount of time it takes for you, for me, and the next guy, it's never the same. And I wish you could say, those people who, when they're in major depression, they deal with it for 5 years, several years. There's no telling how long, when you're going to be down. You don't have a lot of positives to look forward to, and your outlook's kind of bleak. But eventually, something does change, and it's just, can you make it through the lows, knowing that you don't have any positives right now, but there's going to be a better day coming. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, and I actually had a long period of depression myself for about a year, where it really did seem like climbing out of that hole was extremely difficult to do. And I think what was really helpful to me was understanding that really depression never fully is a curable thing, but that, it's always going to be there, but you don't have to let it really burden you down. And I think that really helped me, because I was really trying to just say, I want to get rid of it. And like you said, just letting other people know that I was dealing with it and having that support group, I think is really helpful. And I could tell it's really been helpful for you too.
Yeah, I always knew that you read about people who, you can look this quote up, and I don't remember it verbatim. I remember watching a post-game interview back in 2012 with Brady Quinn, who was never a great starting quarterback, but he was always a very smart guy. And it was about that time where that Kansas City Chiefs football player murdered his fiance or wife or whatever, and then committed suicide because he was really messed up from the depression and his concussions. And he gave a really good speech, and he asked, when you ask someone, how are you doing today, do you really mean it? And when they answer, are they really giving you the truth? And it made me think, when I ask people, how are you doing, I genuinely want to know, like, are you doing all right? I had a friend his wife walked out on him not too long ago. And I'll genuinely text him and ask him, how you doing today, man? And I wish people would have done that more for me. But the quote resonates. It's like, we don't exactly, tell people the truth sometimes. And I never wanted to be that guy who they found hanging in his closet saying, I never knew. He never showed. I wanted people to know this is what I'm going through. Because if you can help me, I'll want your help. I'll take any help you can get.
I'm sure something that caused a lot of these feelings was the fact that, as you said, the person you were was dead, and I know a lot of who you were was being a competitive triathlete and being just an athlete in general. How soon after the accident were you able to just get back on your bicycle?
Do you mean like actually riding the bicycle or actually riding it outdoors?
Both.
Well, when I got the new bicycle to replace the old one, I got a Wahoo Kicker, which is for indoor riding. So I switched mostly indoors for a long time. I didn't really ride out on the road for a while. I think one of the first times I rode back out on the road was in a race in May 2018 down in Panama City, Florida. It was a really weird experience. I was very nervous. When I was gripping the aero bars, if you would have honked your horn, I would have ripped them right off of the stem. Like it was not comfortable, and I did not even want to finish the race. I was not ready to do it, and I did one more race that year outdoors, and it wasn't a good experience either. So I wasn't really ready to get outside until about 2019, and I started bike commuting again to one of the next jobs, which was roughly like 13 miles away. Like, okay, I know the exact route I'm going to get there. It's not too bad. I started to get accustomed to the road again and get a feel for it. But it took about a year and a half before I could really get that comfort of riding on the road again. But it's still never the same. Loud noises can be very scary. I was very, for the most part, I'm better now, but I got really jumpy. Like if you snuck up on me in the office, I'd be like, and it's a lot of things that roads are scary. I actually, I have a lot of vision issues from the crash, but I I usually ride in the middle of the night now if I want to go out on the road. It's a catch-22. You remove the cars from the road, which makes you a little bit at ease. But when you have depth perception and processing issues, you're in the dark. So you try to ride a route that is the most well-lit as possible. And I still have a pretty powerful headlight, but there's always risk involved. But I feel more at ease, and it's also a lot cooler at that time of night.
Right.
But, I feel more relaxed getting on the road again, doing it in the middle of the night. I was actually going to write an article about that, call it the Midnight Rider. But yeah, it took a while and a lot of vision rehab to get to that point to where I could even be on the road. Because with, Atlanta may be in the South, but we still have potholes. And it's very, when you're going downhill, Atlanta's hilly area, you hit a pothole going over those handlebars. So, I mean, it's taken a while to kind of get my vision to the point where I could do this at night.
Well, that's something else that I remember seeing on your vlogs, which I'll talk about in a second, is that you sometimes you're basically an insomniac sometimes, that you can't really get a good night's sleep. Is that something that still is an issue with you?
It's something after the accident, you'll find me saying this on a regular basis, but it became the new normal. Um, you know, I've never had great sleep since the accident. It's gotten better, but I've also been accustomed. Like if I can't sleep, I find something to do. Going through architecture school, you get abused. You have to um, spend several nights awake sometimes. We have what's called Hell Week at the end of the semester, where you can spend several days awake and building your models, getting your final presentation documents and drawings together, your boards. I think most I spent awake was like 6 days, and so pre-accident, I know what the feeling is like, and being up for one night isn't bad. 2 night, it's not horrible, but I do enough stuff to where I can occupy myself with that time, and it's not like I'm staring there looking at the ceiling. I've got a list of things I can do, and so you just get used to it. I'm not saying this is the ideal circumstance, but I don't ever let it be dead time. I make use of it.
Like you said, it's your new normal.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll just go out for a run or a ride, find a well-lit area, because even I have a trail that goes down by a Chattahoochee River that's like right next to my house, but it's not lit. And I'll tell you what, man, even as a white man, I still am afraid to go over there in the dark with lights on. No, thank you. I'll go only there in the daylight, or unless I got somebody with me.
Mm-hmm. So you've talked about going for a bike or a run. What about swimming? How much have you been keeping up with that?
With COVID, not much. So when I was living with my ex-fiance, we used to have a pool, a 25-yard pool. Perfect circumstances, right? They even got the lines painted down it. It's funny. If you've ever read my blog, you have to go back and read a post I wrote about the love affair with the black line. and I wrote a letter about it, how I took it for granted for so many years, and I romanticized it, and it'll change your perspective about swimming a little bit. I just wanted to see if I could that day, and I realized, like, once I left my fiance, or I moved out of my fiance's house, I don't have that pool anymore because I could have swam there all summer. I don't have that black line to follow. The neighbor's pool, when ours was broken, um, I I would always complain about getting those in water lights fixed because 4 in the morning I'd be swimming. So I would use the neighbor's pool. I don't have the neighbor's pool anymore. I've got a little pool. It's not 25 yards. I'd have to use a swim tether, but it's they didn't even open this year because of COVID.
Mm.
And Georgia is not a particularly, we do not have good leadership in this state. So I do not trust the whole situation with opening the gyms. And, I'm a Georgia Tech grad, so I have access to the Olympic pool if I wanted to. That's where I would swim during the winters. I'm just not exactly comfortable going down there because school's back in session. These colleges, high schools, elementary schools, they're petri dishes now. And, I'm not looking to catch COVID. Again, no health insurance. What am I going to do if I catch it? So I don't use that pool. Plus, this is an interesting story in itself, but, parking in Atlanta is not particularly cheap. You always have to pay for parking wherever you go. And since 2014, I had free parking about a block away from Georgia Tech's pool. One day I stopped in at this strip club, and I had talked to him. I said, "Hey, look, I realize you guys aren't open during these hours. Would you care if I park there for a couple of hours when I go swim?" He's like, "Just don't cause me any problems." So I used free parking at a strip club to not pay Georgia Tech for a parking pass. And it was always an interesting experience going down there at that time. So, but then they tore that down, built student housing up there. So I lost all my free parking. I had to buy a parking pass. And that was in March, right? When I started swimming again, because I went on a little bit of a hiatus after last season. I swam outdoors all the way until mid-November. So it gets a little bit chilly then, swimming in a pool that's not heated. And I'm like, got to sack up. It's cold, but you got to do it. So, but I took a couple months off, and then once I started swimming again, I was back in the water for like maybe a month until COVID happened. And I just haven't got back in since. I want to. I miss it a lot. It was one of those things where you knew, like, I'm going to race Challenge Daytona in December, and maybe I get in the pool before then, maybe I don't. But I knew that I've had enough talent in the sport that I could rely on myself to get through a race like that. But I still miss it. I don't want to swim on a tether, And with Georgia, where I live, Atlanta doesn't have any water for about an hour's drive. That's the nearest point where I can go open water swim. So I mean, I don't want to drive out that way. And when you've got, it's the summer, people on boats and partying and stuff like that. Even with kayakers, it's not the most comfortable feeling, knowing that there could be drunk boaters over there that run you over. And if you go by yourself, they might not find you for a week.
Right.
So it's been hard not being able to swim, man. I know that's a long-winded answer, but I miss it.
Yeah, I know, and I understand what you're talking about with swimming with a tether. It's not the same thing, and yeah, that black line actually can be a comfort every once in a while.
Yeah, I spent all those years looking at it, and it's like, I think I'm going to write a love letter to you, see how this works out. And it turned out really interesting, but it's funny. You do take it for granted, and then and I wrote that in 2016. And here we are in 2020. It's like, man, I really missed that. But, swimming, once I was able to swim outdoors again for the past, until this year, but the past 4 years, felt like being a kid again, summer swimming, summer leagues, It's like, yeah, this is kind of nice. You do, get your morning swims in. Sometimes get a noon swim in at, when your work hour or lunch. Like this feels like being a kid again. Not like you kind of leave that point where when you were swimming in high school, college, where it almost started to feel like a job at sometimes because that's how much of a commitment it was and how much time you had to put into it. This was back for the pure fun of it. And there's
Yeah.
something about swimming in the outdoors that is just, it's comforting.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, speaking of this love letter you wrote to the Black Line, it's for everybody who's watching this. It's on your blog, the Swim Bike Run blog. I've read numerous posts on there. It's very, very informative. And you also have a video log, a vlog on YouTube that has been talking more about the effects of your brain trauma. How have the writing on the vlog and doing the vlogs kind of helped you in a way?
Doing that, you're doing the job of about 5 people doing all this stuff, because you're making the content, you're promoting the content, you're handling all the social media, you're the filmer, the editor, the director. It's all a lot of work for one person and learning how to manage. And for me, as an architect, I would never be able to get another job again without going back to school. And because they think I'm a one-trick pony. They see my career. You look at my resume, oh, he's just been an architect. That's all he could do. And people think I'm, overqualified for a job like Walmart, PetSmart, stuff like that. I mean, I couldn't even get a job at a bike shop for those reasons. They said, you just were, too much for us. And so doing all this is kind of, for one thing, it's helped me build alternative job skills that at least give me hope that, maybe one day I can return to work. But I wasn't going to get these job skills anywhere else. And it's also utilizing stuff from my past career. I did a lot of, as an architect, you're somewhat of a part-time graphic designer, just because of how much you have to use Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign and stuff like that. So I just picked up that and I started, adding animation stuff and video editing to it. And, kind of build a new skill set. Other than I'm creating, essentially a job experience for myself to re-enter the workforce one day, hopefully. But I started to find out the brain injury community is a lot bigger than I realized. For 2 years, I felt isolated. I was in a, support group, but I never really felt like I had other people until I started doing this. And then people started, calling me an inspiration. And I was taken back by that. If you said to the first 35 years of my life, somebody would call you an inspiration one day. Well, prior to the accident, I would have never said, I would have never thought that would have been possible. I thought nothing about my life would be inspirational, and then I have people starting to come out of the woodwork, telling me about their story. I've had people who, their partner just suffered their TBI and they don't know what to do. And they're looking for anything and they found me. And, like counselors, they have people they go to talk about what I say to them and process their stuff. All of a sudden, it's like I've become this figure that people can relate to and can actually confide in, and they look for answers from me. Truthfully, I don't have a lot of my own answers, but it gave me a sense of purpose. It's like, oh, I can help other people. I can do something with this. And that's when I know, I knew the old Eric was dead, but this was the purpose of the new Eric. That's when I knew that, hey, this is the life you're supposed to lead. I wish we could go on a different way to finding this, but this is where you're supposed to be at.
Well, get used to being called an inspiration, because it definitely does apply to you right now. I know it's uncomfortable, but I know that a lot of people definitely have good reason to call you an inspiration. And for me personally, I can attest to that. You are an inspiration, not for what you have continued to do after the accident, but everything that you're going to even do moving forward from here. So we've talked a lot about the accident and how you were able to move forward from it. And I'd like to know about your life before the accident. So let's stop here and focus on that in the second part of this interview. How does that sound?
Sounds good, man.
All right. So everybody out there, please join us in the next episode for part 2 of my conversation with Eric Esposito. And Eric definitely encapsulates the saying that it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. We'll see you next time.